and semiconductors. Sometimes there are safer alternatives available, but sometimes there are not. We want to encourage companies to continue to develop alternatives while recognizing that in some cases there are not yet good alternatives to PFAS. In these cases, it is important to ensure that PFAS are handled in a way which is safe to employees and to the environment. To conclude, the Commission is committed to continue the work in close cooperation with you to find practical, balanced solutions that benefit industry, citizens and the environment. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to working together the months ahead.
Bene, grazie a lei. La discussione è chiusa.
Thank you very much. That brings that discussion, that debate to an end. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is a Council and Commission statement regarding the reform of the European climate legislation. I would remind members that we'll have a single round of speakers on behalf of the groups. There will be no catch the eye procedure, nor indeed will blue cards be accepted. So, on behalf of the Commission, we would like to start with the Commissioner himself, Mr. Hoekstra.
No, no worries. Take your time.
It was just the logistics.
No worries, no worries. Please.
President, thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, I truly appreciate to have the opportunity to have this conversation here with you. Let's be upfront about the fact that the proposal we're going to discuss is sensitive, that it is complicated, also from a content and political perspective, and yet it is hugely important. If someone would ask me what the broader goal is we are envisioning in the next few years, I would say that we need to make sure that decarbonization is at the heart of our growth and competitiveness strategy, our climate strategy, and also our strategy for independence. And the way we need to go about this should be ambitious, it should be pragmatic and agile. Let me move into each of the topics to just articulate what we as a Commission view should be the way forward. First, on competitiveness or growth. Let's be upfront about that as well. We need more of it. We need more clean economic growth. We need more competitiveness because, frankly speaking, we're not doing as well as we should. But let's also not have the illusion that the future will be like today. We're up for massive change, and the industry, the economy of the future will be one that is heavily decarbonized. So exposing ourselves to that, making sure we're going to be the winners in the domain of clean tech, reindustrializing Europe, making sure that the growth opportunities are being reaped over here is of essence. And that means creating a level playing field. That means, no matter how difficult it is, continuing with simplification. It means lead markets for those industries that need it. It means significantly more investment in electrification and making sure that we decarbonize also as a way to drive down prices for both consumers and industry when talking about energy prices. Secondly, on climate. Sometimes it might be tempting to just, forget about the problem and do as if it is no longer there. But what is the reality? The reality is that the planet, on average, is warming up by 1.5 degrees, and Europe is at double that number, so 3 degrees. And that is an average for Europe, and some would be on the higher end of that average. And the impact of that is huge. Just think about what it means for our ecosystem, but also think about what it means for our economy. We're easily talking about 50 to 100 billion euros per year for the Union at large, and that number will go up significantly in years to come. And I'm not even talking about, because we don't have the time today, the geopolitical consequences of climate change all over the globe that will certainly be of huge consequence to us here in the European Union. So what that makes sense? Well, it makes sense to listen to science and listen to what they articulate as what should be the true north. It also makes sense to be predictable, because that is one of the key things our companies across the Union ask from us as politicians. And that is also why we decided to arrive at the 90% number by 2040. Having said that, and already mentioned agility or flexibility, it is important to also be street smart, if that is the way to phrase it, in how this proposal is going to work. And that is why, as a Commission, we've decided to bake in 3 types of flexibilities into the design. The first is to allow companies or governments for a relatively small percentage of emissions to take action outside of the European Union. And yes, I do know it is unorthodox, and I do agree with all those who are articulating for certification, for verification, for making sure that this is additional. But if we can pull this off, it truly matters. And it does mean climate action. And by the way, and that is a point that is undervalued in the debate, in my view, that we have here in Europe, it builds a tremendously important bridge with our friends in the Global South who do see the merit in this endeavor. Second flexibility, making sure that negative emissions created here in Europe can be filtered back into the ETS system. I saw an amazing example recently in beautiful Sweden, where the largest CCS project of Europe is taking place. I won't go into all the details of it now, but just to give you the numbers. We're talking about roughly 2% of total emissions in Sweden with one project. And that is absolutely huge. Yes, it takes a lot of investment, but it is a tremendous step forward because it would only take 50 of those type of projects to basically eradicate all emissions in Sweden. So let's continue with these type of projects, and then let's make sure that we also reward that in our system. And the third flexibility is allowing member states who do well in a couple of categories, but who might do less well in another, not allowing them to lower the bar, but actually giving them room to compensate what to do well in a couple of categories in a category where they might do slightly less. And I think that is testimony to pragmatism, and it also makes sense given the huge diversity of our European Union. Final point, independence. Let's not make the mistake again that we made in the past. We have been way too dependent on oil and gas from Russia. Unfortunately, it is actually still coming in, and we have a range of dependencies vis-à-vis countries and also dubious regimes in other categories across the board. Just to give you the number, we're talking about 400 billion. 400 billion the Union pays every single year. Of course, that is in the end member states. 400 billion for oil and gas. Wouldn't it be more appealing to actually invest that money over time in independence and in energy production and electrification in Europe? I think it would. And it would solve the problem that we're currently facing. So once again, competitiveness, climate and independence. Doing it in a way that is ambitious, that is pragmatic and that is agile. That to me should be the road forward. I'm very much looking forward to the debates. I'm very much looking forward to the interactions that we have ahead of us. And let's make sure we bring this home. Thank you.
Grazie al Commissario.
Thank you, Commissioner. Moving on now to our first speaker, Ms. Pereira.
Madam President, dear colleagues, Europe was born out of the courage to turn conflict into cooperation, to build peace through industry and energy. Today, we need that courage once again. The European climate law is more than targets on paper. It is a promise made to the next generation, those people sitting over there. More important than setting a numerical target is making sure we stay on the right course, with ambition, with balance, and with real results. What truly defines European leadership is not an obsession with numbers, but the ability to deliver meaningful, sustainable progress without sacrificing the competitiveness that sustains our European social model and democracy. Because this is not just about saving the planet. It is about building a new economic model, green, fair, and competitive. But let us be clear. Our industries are under pressure like never before. Without investment, without innovation, without affordable energy, this transition will come at the cost of deindustrialization. And that cannot happen. We need flexibility, we need to reduce energy costs, we need to invest in a new generation of technologies, ones that do not only reduce emissions but capture them, that make emissions negative. Establishing a European Industrial Decarbonization Bank with over 100 billion in funding could be a strong step forward. But private investment will also be essential. And above all, we must ensure no one is left behind. Compensation mechanisms such as the ETS must support Europeans, turning the transition into an opportunity, not a burden. Our goals must be guided by science and by courage. That courage to act, to lead, to believe. Because this law is not just about the climate. It is about us and about what we leave to those who come after us. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Volken. Prego.
Thank you, Mr. Vulcan.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin.
Honourable President, thank you, Commissioner. Good to see you here today, and thank you for the proposal. It's always a bit hard to start with a correction, but I'm afraid I have to. The scientific service, your scientific advisor said that 90% is the minimum which we have to achieve by 2040, and beyond that, we could use credits to be more flexible, but incorporating them into the 90% goes against your own scientific service's recommendation. That's not the responsibility we have to shoulder. And that's why my group believes that huge use of international loans is not the right way forward. During the last term, you were nominated. Afterwards, there was a hearing, and one question was whether a 90% target were in line with the Commission's thinking. And you said yes many years ago. And only now, a couple of days before the climate conference, we've got a proposal from the Commission, and we've not got enough time for the Parliament and the Council to discuss that. That is not in line with my understanding of democracy. And at the same time, we're faced with the climate crisis. It's not something we've just imagined. Maybe we should use a different term. Maybe we should say we're fighting not against the climate crisis, we're fighting for the survival of humanity. And then some of the statements we hear today would sound a bit weird. People saying, well, it's about competitiveness. The question isn't, is it competitiveness or climate protection? Competitiveness or the survival of humanity. And that's what it's really about, which is why it's rather shameful to hear the EPP refusing to vote for an urgency proposal, that we can finally conclude this matter. When the climate urgency was declared in this House, the EPP was not on board. They didn't want to call it a climate crisis. They wanted to call it a climate urgency. And that urgency has come full circle. It has become a problem. The EPP is turning a blind eye to what we have to achieve together. We need an ambitious position in the run-up to Belém, and that's what we should be working on as of now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sardoni. Here she comes. Just carry on putting forward these ideological and impossible objectives like reducing emissions by 90% by 2040. Every single day, whole sectors of European industry are calling us to change route. Von der Leyen and Rebea continue to ignore the cries of alarm of businesses, workers, families and consumers who are being affected more and more by your short-sighted ideas. Your Green Deal will have cost by 2050 approximately 1.285 billion euros. For Italy alone, we're talking about 40 billion euros a year. This money, the cost of buying new cars, renovating your house, paying green taxes, will be borne solely by citizens and companies. We're in an enormous crisis. According to trade unions, European industry is losing 500 jobs a day. But you don't care about that. Let's be clear. According to some estimates, over the last 10 years, the European Union has reduced emissions by 10%. Meanwhile, the rest of the world has increased its emissions by 120 points. In other words, 10 times more, 12 times more. The people of Europe must realise that the European Commission is building a future for them based on degrowth. And the only people who like that are a few fanatics on the left. And I say that to you as well, Commissioner. And I'm sure that nobody would want to enable those green fanatics to win the day. Mr. Vondra.
Dámy a pánové.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Commissioner, your proposal is bad from the very beginning right to the end. I'll say that in Czech because no one speaks in English here. And we are sending Europe to death by languages. Why is it bad? 90% up to 2040 is not realistic. You have no scientific impact study, and you've acknowledged that. We won't be able to do that technologically nor financially. The legal basis is wrong. It is an impact on the energy mix of the member states, and that is the exclusive competence of the member states. And you cannot just change that yourself. Third, definitively, it will destroy energy-intensive industries. It will bury our industry. What munition can we produce without chemical industry? How can we produce aircrafts without aluminium? And you've mentioned gas, but the Netherlands is one of the largest buyers of gas, Russian gas. And what have you done yourself to stop that? 4, the flexibility is just green colonialism because it will only help the Netherlands and Germany, but small countries and poorer countries will pay for that. 5th, blackouts in Spain and the Czech Republic show where we will end up. We will be poor, there will be anarchy and chaos. Nothing is forcing us to adopt that, but America and China are laughing out. The best thing to do is to take it back and delete it. Thank you.
Mr. Gebrandi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Commissioner, dear colleagues. Do we need an ambitious climate target in 2040 of at least 90%? And the answer is clearly yes. And if you're not convinced, ask the relatives of the victims of the Valencia floods. Ask those farmers who are out of business because the crops do not grow anymore on their dried out land. Ask people who lost literally everything except their lives due to forest fires. Or ask Slovenia, where the floods of August 2023 alone already cost them roughly 10% of GDP. Yes, but our economy, I hear colleagues on the right saying. Yes, what about the economy? Increased climate change might cost us up to 34% of our economic output, while keeping the rise below 2 degrees will cost us just 1 to 2% of global GDP. So tell me, what makes more sense economically? Fighting climate change is not a leftish ideological agenda. It's the harsh reality we're faced with. It's the harsh consequence of our own behavior. And it's our responsibility to all the people represented in this House to save them from these consequences. So yes, it makes absolutely sense to set an ambitious 90% target in 2040. But it's also important to do so in time for the Paris Agreement process, in time for a strong EU position at the upcoming COP30. So I urge the EPP to support the urgent procedure because that is the only way to be in time in this House, partly due to the late proposal from the Commission, but please don't endanger the Paris Climate Agreement process and vote in favor of the urgent procedure this week. Thank you.
Onorevole Schilling.
Dear colleagues, I also need to start with this House. The 2040 climate now is in the hands of the far right, the people that deny the climate crisis. That has to be the final wake-up call for this Parliament. We have tabled an urgency procedure tomorrow, and it's time for everybody here to really take responsibility. If we want to save the 2040 target, we need this urgency procedure now. And maybe you remember, 6 years ago, this House stood up and declared a climate emergency. The European Parliament made a promise to the people, to the European citizens. And now we must ask ourselves, are we acting like this is an emergency? Ask yourself for a moment. And honestly, the science could not be clearer. It's so obvious what we have to do. We need to cut our emissions by at least 90% in 2040 and stay on track for climate neutrality in 2050. We don't need 85%, not 87%, minimum 90%. And yet, what do we see? Instead of urgency, we see delay. Instead of clarity, we see loopholes. Instead of actions, we see games. Colleagues, every so-called flexibility you put into this law is not just a footnote. It's a gamble with the lives of the future generations. A percentage point less may sound harmless in this room, but outside those emissions are the flooded homes, the dead soil, and the collapsing ecosystems our children will inherit. Dear colleagues, I'm not just speaking here as a member of the European Parliament. I'm also speaking as a 24-year-old woman who dares you to act. And I'm not the only one. I think many of your children are honestly my age. If you don't do it for me, do it for them. Do it for the children that need to grow up in the next years, for the future generations. We climate emergency, now let's act at it. A woman said a few years ago, we own it to our children. These children are still here.
Onorevole Martins. Please.
I now give the floor to Ms. Martins.
Obrigada.
President, Commissioner, is the Earth flat, or do we still believe in silence? We have a corpus of scientific information which helps us make decisions, and scientists have been quite clear. We need to reduce emissions. But if you reduce emissions somewhere else on the planet while we increase ours, that's pointless. It seems obvious because we've only got one planet. So we have to have goals that apply to the whole planet. And what is the Commissioner doing? What is the Commission doing? Ignoring the scientific advice. And you're introducing additional flexibility, but the scientists have expressly said that that won't work. And so we're not going to achieve our goals, are we? Now we've seen the US leave the Paris Agreement. That's happened. And now the Commission doesn't seem to believe in the Paris Agreements anymore. Everything depends on the market. But you can't negotiate the temperature of the planet or the level of the seas as you negotiate with the market. We need to protect, but this isn't happening.
Onorevole Bucait.
Danke, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you, President. Many today referred to what happened 6 years ago, so I'll do the same. It was interesting to see because here in Strasbourg, the EPP were fighting over getting on this photo with Greta Thunberg. I don't know if the pictures are still about, but this has left its mark. Looking at what happened with our heavy industry, Thyssen is just one example. If you look at what happened with our suppliers, the IHK has been sounding the alarm, expected an extra 1.2 million jobs to be jeopardized. And by 2032, they expect losses of up to 50 billion euros. I wonder, Greta Thunberg started this, we had climate stickers, even here in Parliament. We need to say, we've had enough of this, we need competitiveness. It shouldn't be about a reform, it should be about doing away with these climate targets. The same as they've done in the US. The key issue is competitiveness. Thank you.
La parola al commissario Hoekstra.
Back to the Commissioner now, Mr. Hoekstra.
Grazie, Presidente. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your input, your feedback, your support, and in some cases also your criticism. I would implore you that if the combination of growth, climate and independence, and even if it is only two or just one of them is appealing to you, then that would actually make sense to support the Clean Industrial Deal, this proposal, and the whole approach by this Commission. There are four things I feel are worthwhile to clarify, also listening to the various speakers. Timo Wolken, I think he has left the building, but nonetheless, he was asking why now? Well, because in my experience in politics, it is at least as much about process, about communication, about building majorities, as it is about just plain content. So have we overinvested in this? Absolutely. Are we going to continue to overinvest in this in the weeks and months going forward? Absolutely. Because what we do need, particularly for these type of policies, are solid majorities. And yes, sometimes that takes more time than you anticipate beforehand. Secondly, Madam Sardone, but also others were alluding to the cost. And that takes a longer conversation than what we can just do here. But let me be very, very clear what elements you should take into account and what not. One is, let's never confuse out-of-pocket costs with investments, which is typically done in this debate. Secondly, it is of huge importance to take into account the cost of doing nothing and what that would do and what that damage would bring. And Gebrandi and others were already alluding to the damage that has been caused. But let me give you the number for Europe as a whole once again. 50 to 100 billion and counting, and that number will simply only go up. Last, on the domain of cost, let's not confuse ourselves or fool ourselves that even if we would forget about this whole thing, that no cost would be involved. It would have huge ramifications in cost in terms of funding what we currently already have. And I was just giving you the number of 400 billion of euros we invest every single year as Europeans in oil and gas. Do we want that with all the dependencies that come with it? I think we don't. Third, Alexander Vondra was mildly critical, if that is the way to label his contribution. But there's one thing I wanted to articulate to him as well. I would like to invite him to the text because he has often pleaded for technological neutrality. And he, of course, has often alluded to the importance of including nuclear. And I've said many times before that in my view, particularly if you want to solve the problem we have in terms of climate, nuclear is part of the solution space. The wording is there. So the question for him as well is the glass half full or is it half empty? I would say it is half full, even from his perspective. Last but not least, there were also a couple of comments by Madam Martens and others about, hey, but how does it work with the percentage that actually comes from outside of the European Union? Well, just to be clear on a couple of things. One is climate change does not discriminate. It doesn't matter where stuff is being pumped into the air. Even if all the emissions take place outside of Europe, then still we have an incentive to do something about it. Why? Well, because we are on the receiving end of the impact. And the impact in Europe, unfortunately, simply because where we are located on the globe, is larger, significantly larger, twice as large as on average. And therefore it is way more damaging for our economy and our geopolitical situation. Let me also add to that, because Madam Martens was also slightly critical, that we are doing more than our fair share. More than our fair share in terms of climate action. We're currently at 6% of our share in global emissions. That means that 94% of emissions are from elsewhere. And we're doing far more than our fair share in terms of the financing of climate action abroad. We're talking easily about 30 billion out of 100 billion. If the rest of the developed world and countries like China and countries in the Gulf and others that have made giant leaps in their progress would do the same, we would be having a completely different debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I would like to inform you that the President has received 3 separate requests from the Renew, S&D and Greens for an urgent procedure pursuant to Rule 170, paragraph 5 on European climate law. The vote